Hello and welcome everyone. So this is an exercise set to reinforce the supply and demand lectures, to reinforce microeconomics lecture 3, supply and demand, and lecture 3b, comparative statics. Okay, so are children a normal or inferior good is question 1. Explain using economic reasoning. So think about and reflect on the definition of normal and inferior good and apply those definitions. Okay, what happens if the price of if the what happens to the equilibrium price and quantity of lattes if the price of coffee beans goes up, the price of pastries fall, fewer firms sell lattes, health officials announce drinking lattes is good for you. Assume all effects are simultaneous, draw the necessary graphs, and then write a sentence. For this exercise, for number 3, you need to first build a graph. So draw a downsloping demand curve. Vertical intercept is at 20, horizontal intercept is at 10 or 100. Vertical intercept, it's always price. Horizontal intercept, always quantity. And then draw a supply curve, beginning at the origin with a slope of 1/5. This is the line, P is equal to 1/5 Q. Label the equilibrium price and quantity. Suppose the price is 12, find the quantity demanded and quantity supplied, and then identify, do we have a shortage, a surplus, or a market equilibrium? And then at what price is there an excess demand of 40? This requires a little bit of being clever. My advice here, there's 2 things you could do. You could draw a really careful picture. And if you do that, then just looking at your graph, you should be able to figure out all the rest of this. If your picture is not so careful, you could work with equations. Actually, you wouldn't even need a picture if you wanted to work with equations. You could figure out the equation of the line. You could use the slope formula or stare at this and figure out the slope of that line. And then you could use the point slope formula to back out a demand curve, which you could evaluate at the price of $12. You could evaluate your supply curve at a price of $12, and respectively, quantity demanded and quantity supplied will you can solve for those. And then identify if we have a shortage, surplus, or equilibrium. For excess demand, this means we have a shortage. We have quantity demanded is 40 units bigger than quantity supplied. So you could write quantity supplied is equal to QD, let's see, 40 units bigger, so excess demand of 40 units, so shortage of 40, so QD minus QS is equal to 40. All right, and then you could solve and have QD minus 40 is equal to QS, and then substitute. Okay, so hurricane strikes Florida and causes damage and destruction. Millions of customers are without electricity for a week. Consider market for ice bags. What happens to the equilibrium price and quantity in the market for ice bags? Think about the slope. Are they relatively flat or relatively steep? This is sort of anticipating what we're going to do with elasticity in the future. I just want to start thinking about the interpretation of the slope of lines. That's all that's there for. Though this is a really interesting thing to think about. Okay, so let's look at the solution. So first, children are normal, inferior, good. Well, if you want to say children are normal good, you might look around and say, when households over the life cycle, as your income rises, households have more children. So therefore, as incomes rise, demand seems to rise. That's definition of a normal good. Or you can look around the world and say, historically, as civilizations gain wealth, as income rises, fertility rates fall. So therefore, it looks like children are an inferior good. And either is acceptable. The key is, let's just apply economic reasoning. Apply the definition to stand behind your conclusion. Okay, for this here, the key is to identify which curve is moving and in which direction. So when the price of an input rises, that is a supply shifter. It's going to raise costs, so a leftward shift to supply. Price of a complement falls. So the price of pastries fall, the quantity demanded of pastries will rise. If we're buying more pastries, maybe you're thirsty, you will buy more lattes, so a rightward shift of lattes. Fewer firms in the market, that's going to be a supply shifter. When firms leave the market, we'll get a leftward shift to supply. Favorable consumer taste, do this health report. Well, this is going to be an increase in interest, increase in demand for that item. And notice I was friendly. All the effects on the demand curve are to the right, all the effects on the supply curve are to the left. So we can just write down our 2 pictures. We'll draw a big leftward shift to the supply, a little rightward shift to the demand, a little leftward shift to supply in the next picture, and a big rightward shift to the demand. And that'll characterize what we'll get. Now you can stare at this just as we did. So I'm not going to put the pictures in here, but you can see you can go to the lecture from Comparative Statics. Microeconomics lecture 3b, comparative statics, to find the pictures for a leftward shift supply or a rightward shift demand. Hopefully you can draw them from seeing this, but if not, you could see the pictures. Okay, so Let's think about what effect we're going to get. A rightward shift of demand, that's an increase in interest. More consumers wanting to buy the good. That should actually, compete up the price, and that should increase the quantity. Leftward shift of supply, that should push up prices. And there's going to be increasing scarcity, so there will be more prices, and that should reduce the quantity. So notice the demand effect and the supply effect both agree on the direction they tend towards pushing price. So we should expect a for sure increase in price of lattes, and we're not quite sure what's going to happen with demand. Depending on which hypothetical version of the world we're in, if the real state is 1 or if the real state of the world is 2, we could have one or the other. So okay, so I say when you do this, you'll note the equilibrium price unambiguously rises for the reason I just said. In both pictures, price goes up. The quantity sometimes rises, sometimes falls. We get an ambiguous effect on quantity, depending on whichever is the dominant shift. Okay, cool. So for number 4, I just took this picture. So, if you draw in the intercept, this would hit 100. We'll find our equilibrium price is 10, equilibrium quantity is 50. Then I asked what happens at a price of 12. Well, one thing you could do is you could evaluate your demand curve at 12, and if you do that, or if you look at your graph, the quantity demanded at a price of 12 will be 40. Quantity supplied, we could evaluate your supply curve at a price of 12. You'll find a quantity supplied is 60. This is an above equilibrium price. 12 is an above equilibrium price. At any above equilibrium price, the sellers are happier than the buyers, so we're going to get a surplus. And of course we see this because the quantity supplied, 60, is larger than the quantity demanded, which is 40. And the size of the surplus, that's just 20. It's the 60 minus 40. Okay, cool. So equilibrium is at 50-10, and excess supply of 20 units. So I asked if it was excess demand. Okay. Anyway, so, right. So this is just, it's better what I said. It's better what I said than trying to read this. Excess demand at 40 occurs at a price of 6. So if you have the picture, this is really easy. You don't even have to solve algebraically. You just look and see where are we going to get an excess. Where are we going to get an excess demand of 40? So you look and find where's the demand curve 40 units from the supply curve. That happens here at 6. Sure enough, 70 minus 30 is 40. Alternatively, you could solve a system of equations, and that would work too. So a couple ways to solve that one. Lastly, hurricane strikes Florida. Rightward shift in demand. Think about the demand for ice bags during normal times, and then think about the demand for ice bags when there's been a hurricane or any other disaster where there's no electricity. Massive rightward shift of demand. What about supply? Yeah, probably a leftward shift of supply. There's fewer ice bags available, probably destruction. So this is kind of a horrible situation. Clear increase in price. Both of these tend towards an increase in price. Quantity effect is ambiguous. Arguably, it decreases because there's less available. Probably have relatively steep curves, right? Demand and supply are both probably really inelastic, especially in the short term. Probably very difficult to get new goods in, and and consumers have very few substitutes for ice bags. Okay, cool. So if you have questions, feel free to follow up via email.